Hi, everybody. I'm Lucas Kendall. This is my friend Charlie Vignola. We're back for another chat about screenwriting on the occasion that
Yeah.
we don't like it.
How is everybody doing? It's been a while.
Hello, Charlie. How are you?
I'm good. I feel like Fred Rogers, like talking to the imaginary audience. I see Sarah and Tommy and
Mhm.
Bob. Um, no, it's good to be back. It's been a little while. Lucas and I have been kind of busy, but we figured, you know what? Let's get back in the saddle and have a little chat, and hopefully, you guys will have a good time listening.
All right. So
Um,
we just did what we call the pregame, where Charlie and I chat for a few minutes before to figure out what we're going to talk about. And you said you've done some consultations recently.
mhm.
And can you just start by telling me what you said?
Yeah. So one of the things I notice is we've talked about this. It's an ongoing theme in the show is how vitally important it is to start from a great idea. Because you know what I find a lot with consultations is sometimes, many times, most of the time, actually, it's not the general quality of the writing per se, but like what is the premise that we're starting off with. And if you're starting off with, a concept, a premise, an idea that at the end of the day is kind of, hard to concisely describe, or that's not specifically novel or interesting enough, well, the good writing kind of gets lost in that because, for the 3 decades I was doing my job, what we read, what we solicited from writers was purely and solely based on what's the premise, what's the concept, what's the idea. Because generally speaking, the kind of people who were submitting material to us were solid writers across the board. So it wasn't so much about that. We assumed the writing was at least going to be halfway decent, but it was about like, are these ideas getting us excited? Do we want to read the screenplay because that's a quote cool idea? Like, I just heard this great idea. I could tell my colleagues about it. I can't wait to read the screenplay because the idea is cool. If it's not a cool idea, then you could have labored on your screenplay for years. At the end of the day, when you're sending out a query letter, or if you're trying to get your representative to send it out, and they have to tell us what the idea is, if it's not sufficiently interesting, or novel, or if there's not something about it that's cool or punchy, then we're just kind of ambivalent about it, and if the writing is fantastic, then maybe it's a good writing sample for you. But if you're going to go through the trouble of writing a screenplay anyway, the goal shouldn't be it's a great writing sample. You want to sell the material. I mean, you want some sort of payoff beyond it just being a writing sample. Ideally, it should be both. Ideally, it should be a great idea, incredibly well written, but you want the idea to grab people and be really exciting. So for what I do for consultations, there are a number of different services. One of them is talking about ideas before somebody gets to write the idea. And me personally, I wish more people would do that, just because it would save a lot of heartache down the road to make sure that, like, out of all the ideas you're considering, you're going to be starting on the right one and investing all your time and energy on the one that stands the best chance of getting past people like me, because I'm the gatekeeper, to the company, and you want to, grab my attention out of the slush pile of all these other ideas. If you're not, you're just doing yourself a disservice, and you're laboring for something that at the end of the day is just going to be very, very hard to break through. And I do feel like that is like the first and foremost of part of the job if you're trying to be a working commercial screenwriter in the film business. That's it in a nutshell.
How do you have any way that you suggest that people workshop their concepts, their ideas? How do you
I
get
well,
better?
I know a lot of young writers, or a lot of aspiring writers. I shouldn't say young, but a lot of writers are concerned that people are going to steal their ideas, and they're reluctant.
Oh, but that's stupid.
That's right.
Nobody cares about that's
No,
not.
I mean, we should address it. Look, it's a genuine concern that some aspiring writers have, which is, I have this incredibly cool idea, and if I talk to anybody about it, they might take it, or it'll go out into the ether, and whatever. But here's the reality. The reality is, you're a vacuum. You can't work in a vacuum. You do have to sort of workshop some of the ideas that you're thinking about to fellow writers, if you have those kind of friends, or to family members and friends who are not writers. It's like, I'm thinking of an idea, and you throw the idea out there, and hopefully you have some people who will give you honest feedback about, like, it's okay, or like, that's really cool, or and the more overlap you get of that's really cool, I think that's a really good idea. That should excite you. Now, I also understand that not everybody has like millions of ideas. You might have like what you think are one or two cool ideas. That may be true too. But the same rule still applies, which is, if you have one idea and you are seriously thinking of investing, half a year in writing that idea, you might want to, kind of throw it past some people and say, I have an idea, I'm writing a screenplay. Oh, what's it about? And put the idea out there. You could see in somebody's expression that they're just kind of like listening politely, or if they're interested in the premise that you just brought up, and just like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. And the more people who respond that way, then you're on the right track. But if they're kind of like, okay, if they're kind of nicely ambivalent about it, you might want to think that through. Or if you only have one idea, maybe you need to think of like some other alternatives. For instance, say you have an opportunity to pitch ideas, like say you actually do get a representative, and say you are going to be in a room with a development executive like me, and you have 30-40 minutes to kind of introduce yourself. We read your screenplay. What else you got? I hope you're not going in there with with just one idea, because if you get one shot to go in and talk to somebody like me, at least have two, maybe three, because you do want to have sort of a backup idea, unless you're going in just to specifically talk about one thing.
I don't really agree.
Tell me your
you're in a meeting. If I was in a meeting with you and I was at a moment where I didn't have anything else that was good, I would just say, Charlie, I'm sorry, I don't have anything right now, but can I email you when I have something? And you'd probably go, sure. So
you can do that, and some people have done that. But again, you're in the moment. You're with somebody who's excited to talk to you because they just read your writing sample. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the meeting.
But most of the people, I mean, there are like 7,000 entries to some of the big screenwriting contests.
Mm-hmm.
6,800 of those people are not having meetings at Bruckheimer, and they're not going to have meetings at Bruckheimer. It's just it's not. Yeah. They're not. They haven't even written something that hits the threshold of being a professional piece of writing.
No, that's true, right?
And they're not going to. They're probably not going to. And
but they won't even get into the door unless two things have happened. One, you have a great writing sample that you can give to the production company so that they'll want to actually meet you in person. And two, you probably won't even have that opportunity if you don't have some sort of representative.
Well, yeah, but people. This is what I've learned, that people focus on the wrong thing, and they focus on the access, and they focus on the business, and they focus on, when I have my script, how do I do this and how do I do that, and how do I work? That's all just fairy tales. I mean, it's just you might as well be watching reality TV, because it's not going to happen to you unless you can write at a professional level. So what separates a script at an amateur level from a professional level? And it is true that in order to get that first manager or producer even to agree to read it, it's got to have a really cool idea. So you're absolutely right about that. But what I focus on myself, and what I think people should focus on, I would just call content. And that's a very broad term, but I would use it for just to refer to the quality of the ideas behind the writing, qualities of the observations about human beings and human society that make up a story. And that's something that I don't see anywhere. And I would love to talk about it like all the time, but I go, there's 5 or 6 big Facebook groups about screenwriting, and there's Reddit, and there's Twitter.
Yeah.
Almost never do I see somebody talk about what I would call the content. The one place that does is the blog Script Shadow. which I like to read. And
Actually, why don't you explain a little bit? Maybe everybody who's watching
yeah,
doesn't.
sure. So there's a website called Script Shadow, and it's done by a guy named Carson Reeves. That's his pen name. It's not his real name. And he's had this blog for like 10 or 15 years, and he reviews screenplays and he talks about screenplays, and he's a screenplay consultant. He costs like $400. Um, and he has a lot of good practical observations about why things work or they don't work
Right.
that we call content focused. Like if you're going to write time travel, how to keep it simple enough, the importance of stakes in the story, the importance of the rules for the sci-fi malarkey that you're coming up with. So I find him very practical. I find him very lowbrow in that he tends,
Low in terms of his tastes.
yes, and I think he tends to pan things. He panned the Dune movie. He panned Andor, which is like my favorite TV show ever. He was like boring, and it's like, dude, no, it's not boring. It's really.
I think I also read that he wasn't crazy about the pilot for The Last of Us, or maybe the first 2 episodes, and he was just like, "I'm out, I'm done."
Yeah, he has a long. I think
out, yeah, not be.
He has his own taste, but he tends to like what I would call. I mean, there's a certain glorification of just stupid popcorn movies.
Yeah,
and there's a sort of anti-intellectual, maybe you would say, slant about things that are like too highbrow. But it doesn't matter. But he's the only one that I think I would recommend people read every day, because you take the good stuff and the bad stuff you ignore. But really, why are scripts amateur scripts? And there's so many reasons, like bad plotting, bad character, bad exposition, bad dialogue. But it really comes down to all movies are about people. Even when they're about robots or cartoon animals, there's still versions of people. And if you can't empathize and imagine with how human beings feel and react and interact, then you just have melodrama. A melodrama is a drama that does not require believable, people.
mm-hmm.
And it's agonizing to read. It really is. And those are the scripts that I know that they get at contests and consultants get, and it's like, oh man, and you're 5 pages in, and you're like, oh god.
And yeah, if you want to really boil it down, it's like distinct, empathetic people facing adversity largely is what you want to read. And again, empathetic is not even you don't have to do that. It could be the Joker movie, and it's a distinct character.
It's still empathy, even if they're disreputable people.
But again, it's distinctive characters, how they're dealing with adversity, which is like a version of, right?
So you get a good movie idea from thinking long and deep about people and about content. And we've talked about log lines. The bad log lines are they're just too busy, and they're what we would call a hat on a hat or a remove on a remove. I was thinking, you just mentioned like, oh, I've got my cool idea. I don't want to tell it to anybody because they'll steal it.
Yeah.
And almost always when you hear about this and and you say, dude, just share it. I've heard everything. And they go, well, it's like, it's about a guy who works at a cybernetics company, and he realizes he can jack in and he can like steal people's espionage with the cybernetics. And you go, oh, so it's Inception? And I'm like, no, because he has a car chase. And so they just tend to be, they're ideas that really aren't ideas.
Right.
There's a plot is not an idea.
Right.
And so what people tend to think of as their idea is just 2 or 3 or 4 things strung together as a plot. It's a guy who works at a cybernetics company whose daughter is sick, and so he gets blackmailed to steal from them. And so it's like, it's all this stuff, but it's really not any particular part. Is it a blackmail movie, or is it a cybernetics movie, or is it an espionage movie? Like, no, it's all 3. But if it's all 3, it's really none at all. But
it's also about a character facing a problem, and the character has to be interesting enough, and hopefully the problem that they're facing has something to do with their specific character. Like, in other words, you can have any movie could be a variation of like a guy sees something he shouldn't see and is being chased by bad guys, right? That could be a
Sure.
brilliant
It's classic Hitchcock.
that could be a 1-star movie. Who the specific person is relative to the problem they face, the more interesting that character is, the more interesting that setup is. I remember years ago, there was I read, I don't know if it was the script of the log line, but it was a comedy about, it was like a variation on Rear Window. And I think it was a comedy. You might remember this idea, Lucas, but it was like two agoraphobics that like were observing a woman who lived in the building across from them in the city, and they think they see her, hurt or kidnapped or something, and the whole movie is about them having to figure out how to get out of their apartment and get over there because they're agoraphobics.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's a funny premise, right? Because it's sort of like it's Rear Window, but it's taking the guy who's observing everything, and it's just like he's paralyzed by his own inability to get out of the damn apartment. So it's like, okay, I'm interested in seeing how that plays out, especially if it's a comedy. So a lot of times it is taking sort of, what an idea we've seen before, but putting a spin or a twist on it. The more clever and interesting, the better the chance that your script is going to get solicited by somebody like me. If it's just the generic idea, I'm not interested. It's not going to grab my attention from the 1,000 other submissions that are there. But if it's really intriguing, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I would have thought of that. What a cool, interesting play on the romantic comedy, on the chase movie, on the, on a mystery, that kind of stuff. That's what's going to break through. And as Lucas just said, and he's right, the more specific and interesting the character facing the adversity, the dilemma, and how that plays out dramatically relative to the problem they face, that's what's going to determine how interesting the script is beyond the idea, and how much I'm going to be impressed by how you play that idea out, because that's what's going to grab me in, right? So I think that's what you're saying. It's like it's plot plus or premise plus how the plot plays out based on how the characters balance the premise.
I was thinking of all the C words that go into making a good script. Is concept, and then there's construction.
Clarity. No, that's diamonds. Okay, sorry. Keep going.
For me, it's concept, and then it's content first, which is, are you sophisticated enough to understand how people behave, and are you able to put believable human behavior in a story? Because it's so easy to use Final Draft or any of these programs and just go interior cop car, and then the cop chases the bag. You can find yourself having written 8 pages in 20 minutes. If but it's not going to be viable as a movie script if the cop says to the other cop, "I hate these criminals, let's get them." It's like,
right.
It has to do with making it believable. You have to have a sense of, you have to be able to have enough experiences of your own to know that how we imagine experiences are often very different from how they actually are. And, because we're old, like we've graduated from college, we've gotten married, we've had the birth of our child, we've had all these milestones of our life that you look at and you want, and the experience of going through them, sometimes it's what you think it is, and sometimes it has very different, it can be very different, and it's the detail of having the actual lived experience.
No, that's true. That's absolutely
having
true.
the birth of your kid, and then the doctor comes over and goes, "Hey, look," and the kid's going, "Rah," and it's like, "Oh my God, this creature is mine." It's just, things are so different, which happened to us. It was the doctor comes over and goes, "Look," and we're like, "Oh."
Yeah, I think the writer, over time, you get better at dramatizing those things that you've had a personal experience with. When you're younger, you are thinking in terms of idea and concept, and your limited emotional range of experiences. Right. Don't understand how to deal with a senior citizen when you're a 25-year-old writer, or a married couple, or people that have had children. You better
So
be
things
talking.
are, so things are, but the solution is not, you don't necessarily have to be old in order to do this. You just
Oh
sort
no,
of have to be open-minded enough, and you can talk to people, you can read fiction, you can read nonfiction.
you have to do your research. I mean, no matter what it is, if it's
Yeah,
experience you don't personally have experience with, then you better be doing research by talking to people, reading books. That's why, any writer, and like Stephen King in the literature world, or any good screenwriter will tell you, if you're not writing, you should be reading. And if you don't have time to read, you can't be a writer, because
right.
you want to see what other people are doing and you learn from that. Obviously, there's experience, direct experience, and then there's reading, watching movies, seeing how other people set up information cleverly, or establish a character,
Yeah.
or create a set piece. You learn by watching, and then
Right.
you do your.
I'm not going to rob a bank if in order to, research writing a heist movie, but you can, if you have enough experiences of things that are tense, of being under pressure, you can sort of learn just what it's like to sort of have these surreal experiences and these sort of out of body experiences where you're under an enormous amount of pressure. And then the way some things are heightened and the way sort of time can compress or expand. Anyway, but it all comes down to that. And
Yeah.
it's sort of, I just feel very lonely to speak of a human feeling, because I go on these Facebook groups, wanting to connect with other people who I would assume are grappling with the same things of how to empathize and process with all these feelings and experiences and channel them into narratives. And instead I queried a producer and he said this and I can't wait. It's just the stupidest wastes of time.
But I do find when I do go on some of these screenwriting groups on Facebook, and people are brave enough to put their log lines out there. And again, a log line is a very specific thing. A log line is written after you've written your screenplay, and it's part of a coverage. If you haven't written the script yet, then you're basically saying, this is my idea, this is my premise. But a log line specifically means it's an element of a coverage. That's the one or two liners that gives you the concept of the script.
Yeah,
but when people share that, and some people do, I do read it. I'm like, I'm glad that they're sharing it, but it does show me that is where so many aspiring screenwriters stumble out of the gate, is with that idea, because very rarely, and there's lots of them, there are lots of people sharing that. As a guy who worked in the business for years, I would love to be going to these groups and going like, oh my God, look how many amazing ideas there are, fresh talent out there, ideas that, like, if they could just get it into the hands of the right representative. And I'll be honest, it's just not the case. I'll go through there, I'll see so many log lines, and I'll be just like, I wish they could talk to somebody like me about, like, well, if you're having ideas, well, how do you shape it? What exactly is an idea that's going to get the attention of somebody like me? Because they're so far from that so often. And again, I get it. I was there too once. There was a time when I was not working in the business, when I was just out of college trying to figure it out and trying to come up with ideas, and all I had was the orbit of people that I knew to bounce ideas off of. But I did bounce the ideas. I did do that. I didn't hold them close to my chest and worry that they were going to be stolen. I just now, and that might be a personality thing, but it wasn't a concern to me, because I was always coming up with ideas. And so I was curious, like, which ones landed with my friends. And if there was one particular idea out of the many that I was pitching, and everybody seemed to be like, oh, can I work on that idea with you? Oh, that idea is really cool. If enough people responded, I'm like, that's the idea I'm going to work on, because it seems to excite people. So it's your job as a aspiring screenwriter. And again, I wish you would do this before you sat down and wrote the script, to kind of workshop, test market the idea with people whose tastes you trust. Or again, if you happen to know somebody who, like me, who does this kind of thing and help people figure that out, talk to them and have that great idea before you start on that path. Otherwise, I just think that you're burning, you're doing a lot of heavy lifting, but you're strengthening the wrong muscles. And at the end of the day, it's not going to help you get into the competition because nobody cares if you have like a super angle because
Well,
that's not
but if people are new to this, then there's going to be a period of just writing, just to learn how to get from the beginning to the end.
sure.
It's not going to be good. All right. So I talk about content, and then hopefully you can derive from content a concept that's worth writing, and then it's about, is it, to me, I just call it construction.
Hmm.
That's exactly what it sounds like. It's, who's it about? What do they want? What's going, it's the plot and the character and the setting and the set pieces and all of these things put together. And you have to have a certain amount of experience just doing complete drafts of things so that you have the ability in your head to take things to their logical conclusion. Because so who is it about? If it's an espionage, if it's a cybernetics espionage movie, who, we need to find somebody whose sort of whose wound or whose story connects logically to that world, or else it doesn't, it's poorly constructed.
Yeah.
Because this is another thing that people do, is they write their movie and someone says, yeah, but I don't care about the main character, and so they go, well, okay, and then they give the main character a dead kid, as if that'll fix it. But it's not going to fix it because it's generic and it doesn't come from. It's not well constructed. When things are constructed, they all fit together.
Right.
And what the good guy wants and the bad guy wants tend to, they have that mirroring and that rhyme. And you often have the bad guy wants the same thing as the good guy. He's just going to go a step too far and be a step too evil to get it. And the good guy's the one who says, no, we're not going to do that.
So when you're coming up with that stuff yourself, are you figuring that out more in the iterations of the different drafts these days? Or are you trying to like do that kind of thinking in the outlining phase before you sit down and write your draft, like over time, over the last 10, 15 years? You've evolved as a writer. How do you now do that at this
How do
moment?
I do it now is that,
Yeah.
all right, now I have enough experience that I think my instincts are pretty good in coming up with the major elements of that construction. Where is
Right.
it set? What is going to happen? What is the tone? What is sort of the budget level? So because I am trying to do this professionally, you don't want to write a $300 million movie that has a tiny little audience. So if you know inherently that it's a little esoteric, if it's a little dark, if it's a little strange, keep it contained so that the pathway to getting it made is that it's got juicy enough roles for stars, and then you can do financing a certain way. You always really need to know what is the business application for this thing, because the script is a business proposal.
Right.
So, but that's, again, if you can't do it, you're getting ahead of it. So I think, to answer your question, now I have so much experience that I think I have a good intuitive sense of how to get these things right the first time, and then I outline, and then if it doesn't feel right, I'll let it sit, and then a lot of the answers just come to me but it's from practice, and the reason I got this, I think, good at it, if I do say so, is that I had a lot of experience doing page one rewrites. So I made 5 years ago, can't believe it's been so long, I made a short film. It's a two-hander and a spaceship having to do with memory loss and deception. And it's called Skyfighter, and it's on YouTube. And I've had, because I directed that myself, that would be something I could direct as a feature, because that's the proof of concept. The feature script for that, the first time I wrote it was 2015.
Right.
That's 8 years later. And I probably have 8 or 9 page one rewrites. So page one rewrite being like, you just take the idea and just start over, completely start over.
Wow. Wow.
If it's not 8 or 9, it's definitely 5 or 6.
Wow.
And each time I thought, now I got it. I don't have to do this again because this is the good one. And I just didn't realize that it wasn't good enough. And that
Right.
It was too complicated. The construction was faulty.
When you're talking about the construction now, at this point, do you just, it's on auto drive, you just know in the first 10 pages, I got to make sure that this stuff is clarified. At the end of Act One, I know that there's got to be some big event that kicks us off into Act Two. I've got to be writing towards a midpoint. I know there's got to be a bottom of Act Two moment where everything goes wrong. Like, are those things just ingrained in your thinking as you're starting to construct how these events are going to play out?
Yeah, I
Does
think
that,
so.
that's
Yeah.
just you've watched so many movies, you've read so many books and scripts. At this point, you just understand the basic, really broad skeleton of structure for a story, for a
I
script.
think I've internalized film structure to the
Right.
point where I'm better at it. Yeah.
So that's something that I think, obviously, a lot of first timers or a lot of aspiring screenwriters have to really study that in various forms, whether it's their favorite
Well,
movies, or, to at
let me,
least understand the shape, the
yeah,
basic.
but all right. So let me tell a story. I mean, I think I've internalized it because I've been at this like 15 years, 20 years. That's
Right.
crazy. But when I was starting to learn, I was like, how do you structure a movie? And I had these big sheets of white artist paper, and I reverse engineered. I took the Matrix and I took Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I made these graphs for myself. It's just scene by scene, beat by beat, trying to figure out how do they do this.
Right.
I went through a whole movie, and it would help me not at all.
You didn't find that helpful.
It found me help. I found it helpful in that I now knew roughly for the Matrix when things happened, but it was not at all helpful for me to create my own story because the only thing it really helped is if I was doing a carbon copy of the Matrix.
Well, okay, but
I couldn't come up with a concept because if you're trying to do a hero's journey thing, then I mean the Matrix fits, on that Star Wars Luke Skywalker. It's the hero's journey. It's got the the refusal of the call. It has all the Joseph Campbell things, the training, the father figure, the princess character love story thing, and
right.
it has all that stuff. It's brilliant. It's one of my favorite movies. But it doesn't. If you just start out saying I'm going to do my own hero's journey, it's not. You've really got to have for that kind of movie, you have to have a new way they fight. That's what I learned from my research into the Matrix and Star Wars, is that all those big blockbuster action movies, it was all about creating a novel way to fight. And in
A novel way to fight. What do you mean by fight here? What are you using fight to mean here?
the characters fighting.
Do you mean conflict? Do you mean physical fighting?
I mean, the characters' physical conflict was
Oh,
the story conflict was made physical because they did kung fu. They were doing guts
right.
and kung fu. And
So you're
so
talking about external conflict as opposed to internal emotional character conflict.
well,
Literally.
there's tons of that too. But what I'm saying is that what I learned in that all these movies it really came down to how did the characters duel.
Right.
Star Wars, you have blaster. Star Wars is the best because you've got blaster, you've got gunfights, you've got sword fights, and you have spaceship fights.
Yeah.
And you've got both kinds of spaceship fights. You have dog fights, and you've got like the giant submarine type, battleships.
Right. So again, all is about visually what you're seeing when characters like battle one another on screen. Right.
Yeah, superhero movies are all. Look, I mean, how do people fight in real life? I'm asking you.
Verbally and physically,
Well,
if it's
physically is
car,
really,
you're
really stupid. Physically
yeah.
is extremely stupid because you either going to break your hand or worse, you break the other guy's face and then he sues you. So in the real world, there is almost no place for physical violence. It is extremely stupid.
Right, unless you have a job in law enforcement or a job in security or a job
Okay,
where
well, right. But even
right.
then, law enforcement, I mean, so once in a while they have to tackle a crazy person.
Right. And by the way, if it's not an action film per se, then yes, almost all of your fighting is about verbal sparring, psychological manipulation, all
Yeah.
these other beyond car chases and gunfights, which are action movies. That's what you're thinking
Right.
of.
So grown up, so movies that are meant to be for grown-ups. The fighting is through talking, it's through lying, it's really through deception and
Yeah.
manipulation and scheming and all this backroom stuff, which was what Andor was about.
Right. Or by the way,
And
even romantic comedies. Think about the conflict in romantic comedies is always circling around. It's not gunfights and car chases. It's mostly about verbal sparring and manipulation and lying and concealing the
right.
truth and all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
So fighting, I mean, you've got like, in Harry Potter, they fight with their magic wands and their spells and all that stuff. And um, you have some in Game of Thrones, they fought with the medieval swords. And you've got a lot of current, like in the Bourne movies, it's much more sort of military. It's derived from military combat and hand to hand, but it's a little more realistic. And in Bourne, they came up, that was the sort of stroke of genius that they had to make um, to do all that sort of matrix stuff, but in a grounded reality where it's a combination of hand-to-hand combat and shooting people and a lot of parkour and running around and
and I have to say that a lot of that stuff also comes down to like second unit stunt work. It's not all in the screenplay. I mean, if you've seen the John Wick movies, right? I mean, I'm constantly amazed by how they have to keep upping the ante because it's just people in rooms fighting. Like
yeah
how exciting can you make those
I
things?
know I find it boring, and I find superhero movies extremely boring because it comes down to the two characters going and their force beams hit and turn into a glowy thing in the middle. And
Yeah.
so it but so that's what I
But if you were hired to write those movies, if you, Lucas, were tapped to write, Avengers: The Kang Dynasty, you'd have to figure out how to craft those set pieces because those are the big things that people come to see in between
yeah but
characters talking. And by the way, you get a lot
of course I could do it
you
because
get a lot of help. You get a lot of help from the
no,
Marvel
no,
machine.
no. It's not even that.
Yeah.
It's about storytelling. Look, the two characters going, that's always the same stuff. But what makes it different is if somebody is afraid to kill the other person because it's secretly his sister, or somebody's kidnapped somebody's kid, and so they can't. It's all then about it's
Mentor against a teacher, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
you load in the the emotional content of what the fight is really about, but then you add these the plot twisting type stuff where we're back to deception and manipulation where people are staging fights, or you just look for clever ways to manipulate the technology. In Iron Man 3, done by our buddy Shane Black, he had a lot of clever twists and reversal on those superhero fights just because he's such a smart guy and such a great writer. So you can always find ways to make things interesting. The most dramatic things in the Superman movies, it's always that they're starting this fight and Superman's like, I can't, I don't want, don't hurt the people. So what you learn very quickly is the bad guys go, I don't even need to beat this guy. I just need to shoot those civilians, and then he'll surrender.
Well,
So,
that's manipulation. That's manipulation.
Yeah. So I don't know how we got onto this, but
No, talking about different forms of conflict, and it could be physical, it could be mental, it could be emotional. There are different forms, and since all screenplays are about characters facing adversity, you have to learn how to craft.
I was talking about construction, and what for me, like constructing this actual script out of the concept, the biggest decision is whose story is it, and what's their problem, what is what is wrong with them that makes
Right.
them need and want to do this thing. Is it because they hate injustice? Because, their backstories, when done badly, are cliched and annoying, but when done well, they're emotional, because we all have these backstories in our life. If it's our family was poor and people looked down on us, if or if my parents were rich and they were mean to people, and I felt bad for the other people they were mean to. It can be any of these things.
Well, in a movie, if you think about it, what you're talking about is what forces a change in the status quo. And the more interesting the thing is that forces the change in the status quo, the better your premise is going to be, the better your idea is going to be. Because
Well,
that thing that when you're pitching somebody a story, right? That thing is going to be like a person's going through their normal life, and then you're setting up what's the regular day-to-day world in any movie. Who is this character? What is their normal world? And then why are we telling this particular story for the next hour and 47 minutes? What's the something that happens? They get cancer. Their partner wants a divorce. The child dies. They get promoted to a job they weren't expecting. Aliens appear, and this guy, is single-handedly in a position to stop them. They're the chosen one. Whatever the something is.
Yes, but it's got to be one thing.
Well,
you don't want it to be two or three things.
Yes, exactly. It should be one big idea, but that's part of the premise. So, like, again, if you really want to boil it down, it's, your hero, hopefully the more interesting, the better, is going through his normal life. And then some event disrupts the status quo of their life. It usually is something that happens outside of them, but it could also be something that triggers a need or a desire or an emotional change for them to start a journey. But usually it's not just a character sitting around and going like, today I'm going to be president. There's usually something that happens that makes them want.
Yeah, right. Well, we're talking about there are consistent structural elements that you do need to know.
But you have to know them. You have to internalize them over time. And like what you're saying is, you and I, by dint of 20, 30 years of watching and writing and doing all this, we've internalized that. So when we have an idea, we automatically, subconsciously run it through that filter, right? Run it through that system and go, does it check those boxes of what we know have to be in an interesting story? And if they're not, we chuck it out immediately. It just we know it's not going to have enough material to work.
Or we workshop it. I think that people are often afraid to experiment because they are attached to the first thing that pops into their head. And I don't know who exactly, if anybody is watching this, they're probably people who are closer to beginners. But for me, like, one of the sort of saddest things that makes me feel bad is when I'm on the screenwriting Twitter and Facebook, and I see all these people talking about all these contests they almost won, or they've got a website of 8 scripts that they've been working on, and you really you see just how devoted people are, and they're often very nice people, and it's really, you sort of can't help them if they're not willing to. It's the hardest thing in the world, which I did myself, and that's why I feel like I can say this, is because you have to be able to take your portfolio of your 6 meticulously constructed scripts that got the semifinalist award from some stupid contest, and just say, yeah, that sucked. I'm going to start over. I'm going to do a new one. Or, what I did wrong is that it started out being about a family man, and this script really needs to be about a guy who wants a family.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to be able to say, oops, it's not the man's story, it's the woman's story. You just need to be willing. And what happens, it's a little sad too, is that your gut will tell you these things. This used to happen to me all the time. Remember, I told you I wrote like 7 or 8 versions of my feature film. This was after I spent way too much money on that short film. So I was really committed to the thing. I would go through it and I'd be like, oh, I think it's not her story. I think it is his story after all. But how can it be his story if he has no memory of it? Because I've been trying to tell the story of before he lost his memory and after he, had no memory. And as like, no, I just gotta, the entire movie that I need to write is the one that happened off camera. And I need to throw out this 6 years of work. Just throw it out. And which was actually good, because when I was rewriting a lot of these scripts, if I hit a point where I would need to work something out, I didn't have to work it out because I already knew it. I'd already written it. So I didn't
Right.
need to know what just happened to him the last 6 weeks. I knew. And I could say, well, and I could turn it upside down. You just need to be willing to to listen to your own gut when it tells you that there's a radical change that you need to make. Even if it's Lawrence of Arabia, when he goes into the desert and he rescues the guy. And then the very next sequence is he realizes that guy was a thief, and in order to prove his leadership, he has to kill the guy he just rescued.
Right.
Tell me you've seen Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, of course.
But the sequences I mean, right?
At Century Plaza, the restored, beautiful cut of it,
Yeah.
25 years.
No, but you remember exactly the sequences I mean, right?
Yeah.
Everybody should see this movie. So yeah, they spend 15 minutes being a hero, saving this guy, and then the next 10 minutes he has to kill the guy. So
we would call that a twist.
We call that a twist.
In a simple parlance, we would call that a twist.
And most people
take a situation and have something unexpected happen, like that is, like you said, you spend 10 minutes in this incredible, chase or sequence, like, oh my God, we almost got killed saving this person. And then you bring him back to the authorities and they put a bullet in his head. You're like, oh, what?
No, but doesn't Lawrence have to do it?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, in any movie, like, that big twist to you, because you're like, that's not what you were expecting after what you just went through. Like, what throws your audience off? And again, it has to make sense. It can't just be if you do a twist for no internal logical reason, it's stupid.
I have interacted with writers on several occasions, don't know how many, who have advanced in their craft, and they can definitely write. But the experience I have is that, speaking as a producer, the construction is wrong, and it's probably wrong in a pretty obvious way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the movie can't be about letting go and growing up. It has to be about pick one or the other. And there are
unless the letting go allows them to grow up.
Correct.
You're letting go of something because letting go of that something means you are transitioning into adulthood. No matter how painful it is, you have to give that up. You have to leave home.
Well, I was thinking of a script. I shouldn't talk about the particulars because the guy was talented, but somebody wrote a script that had to do with there were two different things that the hero needed to accept about herself, and you only needed one of them.
Right.
And it was a hat on a hat.
Okay.
And that script could have been rewritten, and everything that was wrong about that script had to do with the fact that the writer was holding on to trying to do these two things.
Do you want to, real quickly, in case people don't know, hat on a hat is an industry term. Do you want to explain what a hat on a hat is?
Explain it. It's your term.
A hat on a hat means that you're sandwiching, two ideas on top of one another, when one idea will basically it's gilding the lily. You're gilding the lily. You don't need both of these ideas. A movie idea could be about witches, and then you decide, well, I'm going to throw in UFOs too. It's a hat on a hat. You don't need both. Right. Just focus on the witches, focus on the UFOs. Don't do both. There are, of course, rare exceptions where, like, there's a world in which anything and everything can happen, and that's part of the.
Who makes his whole career of making the exceptions is Rian Johnson, where it can be a time travel movie with telekinesis.
Yeah. Again, there are exceptions to the rule all the time, but generally speaking, if you're not one of those people, then if you're coming in there and you're mixing too many genres, or you're asking the audience to expect too many different things. It's a movie about again, time travel, and there are also UFOs. And by the way, I see this all the time in log lines on the screenwriting boards on the Facebook or whatever, where within the idea, there's like 3 or 4 different competing ideas, and you're just like, ugh, no, it's a mishmash. You need to focus on the one thing and focus on that one thing that's a twist, but not if you put four things or three things, then it's just too much of a hodgepodge or a
Well, right,
farrago.
because it's just plot. It's just people trying to write. They're trying to get from the beginning to the end, and they don't have enough. They don't know how to develop an idea, so they add ideas that are
Right,
unnecessary.
right. And you would say they add those ideas because their initial idea genuinely isn't strong enough to carry a movie, or they don't have the courage of their convictions and they're kind of like overcompensating by throwing in additional ideas. It could be either one of those two
Uh,
things.
I don't even know if it's that thoughtful. I just think they're not like they're just not sophisticated enough as writers to understand how to write a real, quote unquote real script, which is, you want to go deeply into one idea. You don't want to go shallowly across three or four.
All right, I'll give you an example. Have you ever seen the movie Ted, the Seth MacFarlane movie?
No, but I know what it is.
Okay, so I remember when I first watched the movie, and it was just like, what a brilliantly simple idea for a comedy.
Mhm.
It literally is just like a little boy makes a wish that his teddy bear would come to life, and you just push that idea to its logical, absurd conclusion. Because that's all it is. It's a buddy movie between Marky Mark and like his teddy bear that when he was, I don't know, 6 or 7, he's a lonely kid who gets picked on all the time and had no friends. In the opening prologue, 5 minutes, and he makes a wish and the teddy bear comes to life. And it's like, play it real. Like, what would happen? And the parents are freaked out and want to kill the teddy bear because they don't know what the hell is going on, how the teddy bear is alive. And then you cut to 20 years, 30 years later, and they're still friends. They're still hanging out. He's now grown up Marky Mark. The teddy bear is still a walking, talking teddy bear in the real world. But even in the world of the movie, they do a little montage showing how that has passed. They live in a world where nobody knows why, but this teddy bear came to life, and he has to get his, his driver's license, or he falls in love, or whatever. And they play it real. It's not a complicated idea. It's a very simple idea. It's one of those, oh my God, what a brilliantly simple idea. And it's so funny because they said, yeah, we're just going to play it as if like, what if that really happened? What would that look like? And they were able to come up with enough interesting permutations of that idea that the movie was really good. I never saw the sequel, but for the first film, that is a brilliantly simple idea, and they executed it incredibly well. So that's what we're talking about, like just a really clever, smart, simple idea, and then explore all the creative possibilities of that in the strongest, if it's a comedy, comedic, if it's a drama, emotional way you can. And then that's how you get like a really great, cool, marketable, interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah, but the heart of it comes down to the fact that he was a sad kid when he was 6, and I
Yes.
I find that a lot of I know from my own experience there was a certain amount of the appeal of writing these things was to escape my own feelings, and in
Sure.
the end, you learn that you need to analyze and lean into them.
Well,
And
isn't that why so much of chosen one stories are resilient and speak to us? Because generally, in chosen one stories, the chosen one is not the jock who gets the girl and is doing great. Is the most popular kid in high school and everything's going great. Oh, and by the way, you're also the chosen one that has to stop an alien and no, it's always the least likely person that's the chosen one, because the contrast between finding out that like, okay, I'm a schlub who can't hold a job and my girlfriend doesn't like me and my life sucks and everything is bad, and on page 10 two people in robes come to me and go, you're the chosen one. We belong to this, this Asian, religious organization, or this long running 1,000-year-old faith, and we've done the numbers and we've like charted the stars, and like, you, Louis DePesto from like, Passaic, New Jersey, you're the chosen one for our faith. And he's like, huh? And so suddenly this schlub from New Jersey who has no prospects suddenly is, Tom Cruise in Scientology to this cult. He is a living God. And it's like, that would be all right. I'm very curious to see how that's now going to play out, because it's like you've set
We
up a
can write
character.
it.
I'm saying, like, that's like an idea, like a
Yeah.
simple idea. Anybody who likes an idea can write it. But something that's a very simple idea taken to the, its logical, absurd conclusion, either dramatically or comedically, that is what you're looking for. And if it's simple and you're like, huh, I've never seen that before. That's if you and me, if Lucas and Charlie are jealous of the idea, you've got a great idea. And that's the thing that's going to motivate a sale or a competitive bidding war, because somebody is going to hear that idea and go, not only is that a great idea, it's a potential franchise. It's going to like throw off sequels. It's something that multiple producers are going to want to make. That's what you want. And so again, if you're going to go through the trouble of spending months writing a script, really work hard to try to figure out, like, how do I find that or an idea as close to that as possible? And I don't know that you're going to ever find it without talking to people, or bouncing the idea off of them, or getting feedback on the idea. If you're just alone in a room
I
and say,
still think I still think the prerequisite is just to try and write people.
right, but people in interesting situations.
No, I think just start with boring situations.
Boring.
No, I'm serious, because how many of these scripts do you read? People want to say, like, why do professionals say they can just, after a page or two, they know it's no good? It's because the things that come out of the character's mouth are things that no human being would ever say.
Right.
So just observe, life in one of those sort of quiet indie, boring indie movies. Just look at how they set up just regular people, because that you want to ground it in what real people think and behave. And if you can't do that, like it's second nature, none of this other stuff's really going to matter, in my opinion.
Okay, but like, for example, you've seen Little Miss Sunshine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a very simple story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bunch of misfit people going from point A to point B, because they're doing something. The something here is the little girl is going to appear in like a little, kid beauty pageant. But you've got this motley crew, this kind of like a misfit family who are all struggling with their own individual mini crises during the hour and a half of the movie as they're making their way, in this road trip. And this is kind of like a conventional movie construction. But what makes that movie so good is the observation of the specificity of these characters, right? And how kind of interesting, well observed they are, and how they are all struggling with their own situations, and how they all kind of eventually get resolved in unusual ways by the end of the movie. It's also a little bit of a black comedy, so there's a lot of sort of black comic moments in it, but it's also very winning and very endearing. And I would say that conceptually, the idea of like it's a road trip so that this awkward, dorky little girl could appear in this beauty pageant, you already kind of like have a character you're rooting for, and this sort of like misfit family, this broken family that's kind of coming together during the course of the story. It gives you a lot of good stuff to work with. If I read that as a log line, or as as an idea, I'd go, yeah, depending on the execution, that could be interesting. It's probably not for a company like ours that makes The Rock and Con Air and Armageddon and movies like that. But you never know. I mean, if it's so well done, then maybe I would advocate for it at my company and say, I know we don't normally do movies like this, but
Well,
this is really,
you want to meet the writer.
yeah. Oh, for sure. At the very least, you would say, this might not be something we would normally do, but we're going to get the writer in here. And then what happens in a case like that is Michael Arndt, who wrote Little Miss Sunshine, you would never think he would be the writer, but Pixar hired him after Little Miss Sunshine to rewrite one of the Toy Story movies. You're like, what? He just wrote an R-rated black comedy? And it's like, yes, but the writing and the characters were so damn good that like you want to bring him in to work on your Toy Story movie, because it is all about how can we make these characters as interesting as possible. and he did a great job, and he wound up getting, a lot of work as a very high dollar production rewriter on movies after that. So yeah, again, it's good because it's a quirky idea. Like Little Miss Sunshine is kind of a quirky idea. It's not a big idea, but it's a quirky, interesting idea, and then it's incredibly well executed. So you have the benefit of like, all right, it pops up above the radar conceptually a little bit because it's this weird dark comedy idea, but the writing is so exceptional that even if we're not going to make this movie, we're going to want to work with this writer. What else are you working on? Well, we're doing rewrites on Bad Boys. Do you want to come in and work on that because we need comedy punch up and character work? And so that helps get your foot in the door. But in that case, he's kind of got both, which is a quirky, interesting idea, and it's exceptionally well executed. You want both if you can do it.
Okay, so it looks like there's going to be a strike.
It's looking increasingly more like it's going to be a strike. I understand that they're making a little progress here and there, but inevitably every decade and a half, we need one of these. And in this case, it seems like once again it's about streaming, which has been this massive upheaval of the way things normally worked in Hollywood. Also, there are issues of AI, which has become a new looming threat. I don't think we haven't really talked much about AI on this show, but in the intervening time since last we got together, these massive upgrades of generative AI programs that can create artwork. Chat GPT, I think they're on volume, 4 of that now, and how it can generate stories and scripts and sonnets and song lyrics and all this stuff with seconds, are showing in real time this is going to become an issue. One of the things I'm worried about with AI, and we haven't talked about this at all, is much of the way Hollywood works is, I'm a screenwriter, I wrote a script that's a good idea, and maybe the writing is pretty good, and I set up the script, and then it's in development at a studio or a production company for years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. I work on it for a year and a half, 2 years. Then they hire 2, 3, 4 writers after me to work on various iterations of the idea. Then they get it to the point where they're going to make the screenplay. Then they hire Craig Mazin or Tony Gilroy or some big, production rewriter to come and do the production rewrites that are going to be used when they shoot the film. What my fear is going to be with AI is that AI is going to put all the interstitial screenwriters that would normally work on those scripts out of business. That there's going to be an initial script, but written by Lukas, me, or you out there, and then they're going to have a proprietary AI that can spit out iterations of this script that we created. And then when it gets closer, and they can tweak it, they'll be able to design it to tweak it. They'll get their Craig Mazin or their Tony Gilroy to work on whatever that iterative version of the script is, and do the final polish by human before they go shoot the draft. And the great middle class of writers that normally would work in the development evolution of a project might find themselves priced out of the business by a free AI that works.
I'm not sure, because even if you use an AI, there's got to be like an editor.
Yeah, but the editors will be the Craig Mazins and the Tony Gilroys. It won't be those middle class of writers.
I don't know if those guys want to. I don't know. I'm sort of dubious about the whole thing. I'm not worried because as far as I'm concerned, an AI is not going to do what I can do.
It won't be able to do what you can do exactly, but if I throw all the Lukas Kendall screenplays in there and feed the information into the AI, it will come pretty close to being able to how you use words, how you structure, your little quirks. It won't be perfect. It doesn't have to be, because at the end of the day, they'll hire somebody at the end to come on board and do the production rewrite of that script. But it takes you, like you said, 5, 6, 7, 8 drafts for you to be doing that. But if an AI can be doing it, and there could be some supervisor, Akiva Goldsman or J.J. Abrams or somebody that's overseeing that and tweaking it with prompts along the way, and then finally it's like, okay, now it's close enough that I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to rewrite the dialogue. I'm going to make a couple of modifications, but the iterative process that was normally done by half a dozen screenwriters can now be done, it's definitely, they're definitely going to play around with it, no question,
Well,
because
hopefully the union will put their foot down and
that's
disallow
what
it right here, right now.
they have to do that now, because AI is the streaming of 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And streaming has eaten everything up, right? Streaming is now like eclipsed and overshadowed
Mhm.
all, so many aspects of the way Hollywood created content. And now they're still acting like, well, we're a nascent technology. No, you're not. Now you're the mainstream. That's how everything is done now. So you don't get those benefits that you got when you were first starting out. Like, remember, I don't know if you remember this, Amazon used to not charge sales tax a million years ago when Amazon first started.
I dimly
You could
recall.
buy, they didn't charge sales tax. And one day it changed because at a certain point, people are just like, okay, you don't need that benefit anymore. You're not growing anymore. You're now a multi-billion-dollar company. So that changed, and now you have to pay sales tax. Well, it's the same thing. Streaming is saying, well, we're still a growing technology. You're not anymore. It's like a decade and a half later. Now you're the mainstream. So the fact that shows used to be 24 episodes of a season that got whittled down to 13, that got whittled down to 10, that got whittled down to 8. Well, those writers that used to get paid, if you're on the staff, for 24 episodes are only getting paid for 8 episodes now. And they don't get any residuals if you're working for, Netflix or Hulu or any of those companies, because it's not a network where those things are sold into syndication. They pay you more upfront if you're working for a streamer, and you never see residuals anymore. That's all you will ever make. And now that's what most of writing for television is like. And it's just getting harder and harder for the people who are not Ryan Murphy and Shonda Rhimes to kind of make the living they used to make writing television, because they're working less frequently on, they're working on many shows. But one of the other things was that when you're locked up on a streaming show, you would be on the staff of the streaming show, but then that would stop you from taking other jobs, and the contracts would kind of like put you off from going, well, if I'm only writing 8 episodes here, I want to be able to write 2 or 3 other shows during the year. But there were contracts that were preventing those writers from being able to do that, and so you were locked in.
Yeah, that's why there's going to be a 5-month strike probably.
Yeah. So, like, again, in this case, I know that the WGA strike is coming before the potential Directors Guild strike and the Screen Actors Guild strike. Those are waiting in the wings, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen with the WGA strike. So hopefully, if the WGA strike can like finish quickly, that if it happens, then maybe those other strikes won't last too long. But if it goes longer, then who knows what's going to happen for the second half of this year. And there's a lot of people that are very tense about it, because we've seen massive layoffs at Disney, at Warner Brothers, at Netflix, at every single like tech company, Facebook, every single tech company, and every single like studio and production company this year. Tens of thousands of jobs have been cut. And so on top of that, you're now telling me there's going to be a strike, that could be we don't know how long it's going to go. So yeah, it's understandably creating a lot of nervousness in the business.
Well, on that note, I got to go.
on that charming note, yeah, that upbeat note, yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, audience.
Thank you. Great seeing you guys, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.